There are crystallizing moments in the course of history when, in spite of the differences that exist among us, our common reverence for life demands that we speak with moral courage and clarity on the side of love. The interesting thing is that this morning, our service was about reverence for life and our interdependence. So it's not a surprise. As people of faith and conviction, Unitarian Universalists share a belief that every human life is sacred, endowed with worth and dignity from the moment of birth, with no person more deserving of freedom and flourishing than any other. Our living tradition has long maintained that the only hells that exist are those that we create for one another here on earth. We are watching in real time, and this is a statement since February, as the people of Gaza exist in a human-made hell that grows more unimaginable every day. At the point of this writing, it was 28,000 Palestinian civilians have been killed, and we know that number is greater now, and nearly 70,000 have been injured by Israeli attacks in Gaza since the Hamas attack on Israeli citizens on October 7th. The medical infrastructure in Gaza has been decimated, and the Israeli government continues to prevent humanitarian aid, including food and water, and from reaching refugees. At the time of this writing, the Netanyahu administration had announced the forced evacuation and ground invasion of Rafah, where 1.3 million displaced Palestinians has set up a massive tent city. And you may be sharing some of this with us, so I'll skip it. In that spirit, there's more, but Rebekah will fill you in on the other statistics and details. In that spirit, the Unitarian Universalist Association reiterates our condemnation of the Israeli military's ongoing violence in Gaza and joins again with the growing chorus of voices across the globe urging immediate and total ceasefire, the provision of massive emergency humanitarian aid, and safe return of all hostages and prisoners. This terrifying moment calls all people of faith and conscience to do everything in our power to push our governments to interrupt genocide, address humanitarian crises, avert multinational war, and weave a just and lasting peace across the globe. This statement can be found, it's a longer statement, I'll not read it all. This can be found on the front page of the website of the Unitarian Universalist Association. So in the spirit of faith, our Unitarian Universalist faith, that we welcome and gather at this time, that we may live into the prophetic call of our time. I'd like to invite up Marion Hanna-Wilson, who is the chair of our Racial Equity Team. Marion, if you'd like to come on up. I think first what I want to do is, I was going to light our chalice, but the thing disappeared. Okay, if I find a thing, I'll let you know. Generally, we begin our activities with a lighting of a Unitarian Universalist chalice, which was first created by the Unitarian Service Committee in the 1940s, used on documents as people were fleeing Nazi persecution. So he's going to help me, because he knows where he is. He's ready to rescue. That's Jean.
Hello, I'm Marion Hanna-Wilson, as Reverend Beth said. As you may know, the Racial Equity Team here at the Unitarian Church of Hinsdale is offering a series of programs to provide information, resources, and dialogue regarding the war in Palestine, Israel. We began our exploration on March 21st at our Brave Conversations Zoom session, screening a couple of short films for discussion. Our discussion continues on April 18th, and we are featuring a conversation with Dana Ashrari in person on the Zoom, Executive Director of the Unitarian Universalists for Justice in the Middle East. If you're interested in joining us, it's open to everyone. Contact me for the Zoom link or check our news and notes. This afternoon, our exploration continues, and we're so pleased to present Rebekah Levin, founder of Committee for a Just Peace in Palestine, Israel. So here's just a little bit of her background. Rebekah is a lifelong Oak Park resident. She received her PhD in Policy Research and Administration from the University of Chicago. She retired from her position as Director of Evaluation of a major Chicago foundation 2 years ago. She is currently a member of Tzedek Chicago, an international Jewish congregation based on core values of justice, equity, and solidarity. Previously, she has been a teacher and music leader at Oak Park Temple, West Suburban Temple, and the Secular Jewish Community and School of Oak Park. Rebekah will speak about her journey as a Jew who is committed to justice and peace for all people in the Mideast region, and her thoughts about how concerned Americans can engage with the devastating situation in the Holy Land. And I'm sure Rebekah will share this. She returned, I think you actually flew in there on October 7th, and she returned in November after spending 5 weeks engaged in peace work among Palestinians in the West Bank. Please help me welcome Rebekah Levin.
Thank you, everybody. First of all, Pastor Johnson, thank you for inviting me. I have to tell you, I came a bit early and I was sitting in the back during your service. And I was so taken by the closing song. When I was driving here from Oak Park, I always have to quiet myself and get myself ready to give this presentation because it takes a lot from me and I need to be focused. And I talked to my phone and I said, Siri, would you please play Blue Boat Home by Peter Mayer? And so I played it and sang it in the car, and then came here and had it on your for your service. So it just made me feel like I definitely where I should be today. So thank you so much for that. I always think that it's important to put your cards on the table, face up, when giving this type of presentation. So I'll share with you that when I was at another gathering to give a presentation, one of the attendees asked me before I spoke if I was a radical or more balanced. I responded that I'm an extremist for justice and love. My guess is that some of you could also describe yourselves that way. That said, I would guess that we are a diverse group of people, even here in this congregation. Some of us have been working to achieve a just peace in Palestine, Israel for many years. Others here are just becoming familiar with the issue. Some of us may identify as Palestinian rights activists, others as supporters of Israel. Some of us identify as human rights activists, or some combination of these. And I would guess that some people don't know what to think, but want the violence in Palestine, Israel to end. It is my hope that this afternoon's conversation will lead all of us to be better informed, strengthened in our commitment to do the work for a just peace, supported by each other, and have ideas of how we can make a positive difference. My plan for this afternoon is to share with you a bit about my recent journey to this troubled land, what I saw and experienced, and thoughts about what we can do here in the U.S. to support a just peace. In that my time was spent on the West Bank, I will not be spending much time talking about Gaza this morning. But as most of you probably know, on January 26, the International Court of Justice in The Hague ordered Israel to prevent acts of genocide against Palestinians and do more to help civilians, although it stopped short of calling for a ceasefire. Between October 7, 2023 and April 1, 2024, almost 33,000 Gazans have been killed, including over 13,000 children. Over 75,000 Gazans have been wounded, including almost 8,700 children, and over 8,000 people are missing from Israeli attacks on Gaza since October 7th. The revised death toll from the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel stands at 1,139 people and over 8,700 people injured. The World Health Organization warns that illness may ultimately kill more people than Israel's offensive, with rates of infectious disease soaring. Israel has damaged or destroyed Gaza's essential water, sanitation, and health systems, and more than half of Gaza's homes have been destroyed or damaged. I and my colleagues are committed to and working for an end to the violence there and an immediate ceasefire. So let's begin. When talking about Palestine, Israel, the question is always where to begin. For where you begin can have an enormous impact on how you see what is going on right now. And context is critical for understanding the storyteller's perspective and what is influencing how and what they see, understand, and share with you. So I will give you a brief background on me so that you can more critically listen to what I say and be able to think about how this one person's perspective and experience are shaping their narrative. I grew up within a Reformed Jewish temple where the dominant theological tenet was the belief that all human beings are created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and that we are God's partners in improving the world. Tikkun Olam, the repair of our world, was her mandate, to bring about a world of justice, wholeness, and compassion. We learned about struggles for civil and human rights and were taught that we bear responsibility for working towards justice. The Jewish roots of our values were attributed to many different scholars, teachers, and writings, but those of Hillel were some of the first and most powerful lessons. Im enani li mi li, if I am not for myself, who am I? Uchshe ani la'atzmi ma'ani, if I am only for myself, what am I? V'im lo achshav matai, and if not now, when? And the second that I recall was, that which is hateful to you, do not do unto others. That is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and learn. My connection with Israel started as a child. Like most Jews of their generation, my parents were enthusiastic supporters of the state of Israel, and we grew up with a strong belief in and commitment to the state as the rightful national home of the Jewish people. The context to that possession, from our perspective as American Jews, was World War II and the Holocaust. We believed that we had earned the right to our own country with the deaths of 6 million of our people. And though most Jews lived outside of Israel, we still saw it as a critical pillar in our current and future safety. If another Holocaust were to be threatened, we were taught that we could always run to the country that was there for us as Jews. My family was not in the Holocaust. We were from what was then the Soviet Union. But as my Russian, Ukrainian relatives will tell you, they did not feel that they were Russians or Ukrainians, given that they carried the stamp Jew in their passport. Some of our family emigrated to Israel shortly after 1948, but my grandparents came to the US. Like many other high school and college students, I went to Israel for a summer in 1974 and felt the rush of being in a place where it was my tribe that was dominant. Just knowing as I walked down the streets that most of these people were Jewish, hearing Hebrew spoken everywhere that I went, celebrating the Sabbath and feeling the quiet of the holiday descend on the entire communities where I was staying gave me a sense of belonging as a Jew that I had never felt here in the States. And this, we were taught, was a land that had not had a people living there. And we were a people that had had no land. This land could be ours. In 1983, I returned to Israel and was considering moving there. I took a job working at the Bureau of the Advisor to the Prime Minister on the Status of Women, where I wrote their publication about battered women. I had no previous knowledge about the high rates of domestic violence in the country and its critical connection with the militarization of the entire society. This project was the first serious crack that I experienced in the image and understanding of Israel that I had been taught. The following year, I joined a team of 4 researchers working for one of the Knesset members, Shulamit Aloni, the head of RATS, the Human Rights Party. The team had been brought together to write the first research overview for the government called Human Rights in the Occupied Territories, 1979 to 1983. We had access to the Israeli government and military archives, which held many documents that had been recently made available to the public. We read every document in Hebrew, Arabic, English, French, and German that were available to us at the time. It was through this work that my entire understanding of the state of Israel's origins and history began to break down. I learned that there had been 1.3 million Palestinians living on this land as of 1948, of which 750,000 were expelled and made refugees by Jewish militias and the new Israeli army, and that we engaged in a horrendous ethnic cleansing to make this land our own. I was shaken to my core by the words of my own Jewish Israeli heroes, including this quote by David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel. In our political argument abroad, we minimize Arab opposition to us, but let us not ignore the truth among ourselves. I insist on the truth, not out of a respect for scientific, but political realities. When we say that the Arabs are the aggressors and we defend ourselves, this is only half the truth. The fighting is only one aspect of the conflict, which is, in its essence, a political one, and politically, we are the aggressors and they defend themselves, unquote. Again, this was from David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel. I ended up moving back to the US, and in 2002, a group of us from Oak Park created CJPIP, the Committee for a Just Peace in Palestine, Israel, to educate and activate people in our communities about the reality of life in Palestine, Israel, as we ourselves were continuing to learn from Palestinian, Israeli, international, national, and local journalists, activists, educators, researchers, artists, and community members. This past March, I decided to go to Palestine, Israel. I had wanted to return for many years to do peace work there, to help ground and inform the work that we were doing here, and the time was right for me. I contacted an Israeli colleague who was working for the New Israel Fund, which is an Israeli philanthropy with an activism arm focused on democracy and human rights. What I would do was uncertain, but it likely would include being a part of something called Protective Presence, in which Israeli and international activists act as a buffer between the Israeli military, police, and settlers, and the Palestinians. The protective presence strategy has been used increasingly over the past few years due to the uptick in settler attacks and military raids. When Palestinians resist these assaults through protests in the courts, they are often met with violence from the Israeli military, police, and settlers. With the protective presence strategy, Israeli, Jewish, and international activists use nonviolent direct action, challenging settlers, confronting soldiers who are threatening Palestinians, and sometimes even using their bodies to nonviolently obstruct house demolitions, evictions, arrests, and assaults targeting Palestinians. Unlike Palestinians who, when they're arrested, are tried in Israeli military courts where they are convicted 99% of the time, Israelis and internationals are subject to Israeli civil courts where they receive greater protection. Over the past year, there has been a significant increase in the attacks on the Palestinian villages around Ramallah, the Palestinian city in the West Bank that serves as the de facto administrative capital of Palestine. Residents were being shot and beaten up, and homes, businesses, vehicles, and fields were being torched. My contact said that it might be helpful to have me work there and describe 3 types of protective presence work that might be needed. 1, the Israeli army was regularly breaking into Palestinian homes at night, ransacking them, and taking people, men, women, and children, to prison, most of whom are there under administrative detention without being charged. Having Israeli Jews and internationals sleeping in Palestinians' homes sometimes decreased the level of violence by the Israeli army. Not always, but enough to make it a needed action. It was also going to be olive harvest season, and having internationals and Israeli Jews accompany the farmers sometimes deterred the attacks from the Israeli settlers who were trying to prevent the Palestinians from harvesting their olives. The settlers are often guarded by Israeli soldiers who will fire upon the Palestinians if they resist the settlers' attacks. And finally, accompanying Palestinian children to their schools was a needed protective presence action since they were being threatened and attacked as they walked from their homes. I was to fly to Israel on October 7th, find my way to East Jerusalem, and get onto the West Bank, and then contact my contact for further directions of where to go. When I arrived in Israel, I was picked up at the airport by a young Israeli friend. I had arranged to stay with her for one night and head out the next day. But as we drove to her home in Gedera, halfway between the airport and Gaza, the missiles from Hamas were exploding above our heads to the east and west. Kipat Barzel, she said to me, Iron Dome, the anti-rocket system for which U.S. taxpayers had spent $2.6 billion over the last 10 years, was knocking out these short-range rockets coming from Gaza. When we got back to her home, we watched the news, and it was clear that there had been a horrible attack by Hamas. But I didn't know what was real and what was not from the Israeli TV news, which is quite similar to Fox News here in the U.S. But when I went online and read multiple news sources, the horror of the attack was clearly real. I heard about the attack on the people attending the concert and the killing and capture of Israelis in kibbutzim, which are the collective farm settlements, close to Gaza. I have family living on a kibbutz close to Gaza, and I wondered if any of them had been hurt or captured. Sirens were going off and explosions were rattling the windows throughout the night. By the next day, the missiles were no longer falling anywhere near us and had been replaced by Israeli fighter jets flying south to Gaza, only 40 kilometers away, where they were ravaging neighborhoods from north to south. Having watched and listened to reports and witnesses about the increasing stranglehold of Gaza over the past years, the seemingly ineffective efforts to stop the occupation, the never-ending land grab in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, the storming of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the increased killing of Palestinians in all of the occupied territories, that Hamas would carry out an attack on Israel was not a surprise. But like everyone else, I was shocked and horrified by the mass slaughter and kidnapping of Israelis. And I was mystified at how they had been able to reach so far into Israel. And there were still Hamas militants at large. But I was not around anyone with whom I could have this conversation. There was no context to be found anywhere on the news or in discussions with my friend. It was like being in the US after 9/11. I texted a friend of mine on my second night in Israel, quote, "As you can imagine, the coverage on the televisions here are completely without any context other than the rightful horror, outrage, fear, and grief of the Jews, coupled with racist and dehumanizing characterizations of the Palestinians. I am surrounded by people for whom I have great affection, but who have been thoroughly indoctrinated and believe wholeheartedly that the Arabs, Palestinians are animals who should be slaughtered. But I also am watching as my friend is crying, and I know she sleeps with a knife in her bed. She is terrified for herself and her children. There is no space to talk about anything but her fear and grief. Learning to listen intently to these fears and beliefs and responding in a way that has the potential to at least raise questions has taken more patience and grounding than I thought I had in me. And doing it while we are confronting such shock and pain of the current situation makes it even more difficult," unquote. Michael Sfard, an Israeli human rights lawyer, wrote an article on October 16th in which he addressed this challenge in talking about the situation that day. Quote, "At what point in time do you start an article about the catastrophe unfolding now in the Gaza Strip? With the horrendous war crimes committed by Hamas on Saturday, October 7th, when its men carried out a mass slaughter of Israeli civilians, killing hundreds, kidnapping women, children, and the elderly, and violating every human moral code, when they seized control of Israeli villages on the Gaza border for hours and went door to door murdering their inhabitants and massacred partygoers at a music festival? Or should we start almost 16 years ago, when Israel imposed a brutal blockade of Gaza, unprecedented in the modern era, with the backing of the entire Western world over an area that is home to more than 2 million people, more than half of them children? 16 years in which Israel left Gazans deliberately on the brink of suffocation? Perhaps we should begin in 1967, when Gaza was conquered by Israel in the Six-Day War and put under a state of permanent occupation by a country that also operates an apartheid regime? Or should we go back to 1948, to the Nakba, to the enormous ethnic cleansing of Palestinians carried out by the newly born Jewish state? Activists and intellectuals on both sides stick to their tribal tents, some emphasizing the crimes of Israel and disgracefully dwarfing the crimes of Hamas, others denouncing the Palestinians and completely ignoring the inhuman context of the iron boot with which Israel has tread on the necks of Palestinians for 75 years, unquote. Again, this was by Michael Sfard, a Israeli human rights lawyer. I share this with you because this theme of being able to recognize the pain and anguish of one group at the same time that you hold the pain and anguish of another, recognizing the radically different situations being faced by both groups, but we're trying to put a rank order to the fear and the grief, seems ludicrous. This theme and challenge kept coming up for me throughout the 5 weeks that were just beginning. On October 9th, 2 days after arriving, my contact told me that there was a change in the needs of internationals and Israelis doing peace work in Palestine, Israel. Rather than working in the small towns around Ramallah, activists were being mobilized to support Palestinian shepherds in the West Bank. I knew what this was about. 3 days before I left for Palestine, Israel, the New York Times had published an article in which they described how Palestinian shepherding communities are being pushed out of their villages by Israeli settlers. Kerem Navot, an Israeli organization that monitors settlements, had reported that Israeli settlers were establishing large numbers of herding outposts near Palestinian villages, more than 20 in 2023 alone, covering more than 140 square miles of land where Palestinians were living. This massive land grab had been happening for decades, but the rate of land theft had increased dramatically over the past few years. And with all eyes on Gaza, the land grab was skyrocketing. So when my contact asked if I would be willing to join with the Protective Presence activists working with the shepherding communities, I said yes. I spent time in 4 shepherding communities in the central and northern Jordan Valley during the 5 weeks that I stayed in Palestine, Israel. Wadi Sik, Ain al-Rashash, Al-Marjat, and Al-Farsiya. The work was similar in each of the villages. Much of the time was spent sitting in tents or under a tree, watching the hills where the Israeli settlers had built their encampments or full-blown settlements overlooking the Palestinian villages. Sometimes we would see them watching us and the village, standing in or near their trucks, often with their weapons in full view. We never knew when they would come into the villages, nor what they would do. Sometimes they would drive their tractors, trucks, or ATVs down the hills and stop, watch us, and then return to the hilltops. Other times, they'd drive into the villages, pull their vehicles within yards of us, get out, walk through the tents and homes, shouting at the Palestinians, always brandishing their automatic weapons and threatening to destroy their homes or kill them if they didn't leave. While some of the time the aggression would end with threats, at other times there was serious physical violence. The shepherds also asked for activists to accompany them as they took their sheep and goat herds out to graze. because much of the land around their villages where they had at one time grazed their flocks was now taken over by the settlers. They had to walk far from the villages to find somewhere for the animals to eat. We would sit in the valleys for 4 to 5 hours. Sometimes it was peaceful. Other times, the settlers would drive their vehicles into the middle of the herds, blow their horns or fire their weapons, and frighten the animals so that they would run off. At times, they attacked the shepherds, shooting them and beating them. Settlers also came into the villages and destroyed solar panels, smashed windows, broke water pipes, and destroyed the large tanks that were trucked in to provide water for the villagers and their animals. Natural wells that Palestinians had used for years have been filled with boulders by the Israeli army, while settlers have commandeered other springs and pools, refusing to allow Palestinians to have access to them. So all water has to be purchased and trucked into the villages. In one village in the northern Jordan Valley, we could see a new water pipe being installed by the municipality, but it will only be for use by the Jewish settlements. Besides destroying property, settlers regularly steal Palestinians' animals, and there is nothing that the Palestinians can do to stop them. One afternoon in Al-Farsiya, in the northern Jordan Valley, a settler came into the village and stole the tractor. The only way that the villagers could retrieve the tractor was to go to the police and pay a large sum of money for a trumped-up charge. Another day, a couple of settlers went to the land of the farmer living next to the shepherd's village and stole his 50 cows. They simply went into his pastures and brought his cows to an area near the settlement and said that the cows were theirs. The farmer called one of the shepherds to tell him what had happened, and the shepherd told us, the activists. There were 5 of us at the village that day, so 3 of us drove over to the area in the hills where the cows were taken, while 2 of us stayed on to watch in the village. The 3 who left went to take pictures of the cows to document the theft and be able to present evidence to the police. But a group of the settlers decided not to allow this, and they attacked the activists, bashing in the face of one of them and roughing up the other 2, stealing their phones, as well as throwing a huge rock through the car's back window, destroying the back of the car. I share this story with you not only to give you a sense of the wanton theft that takes place, but also because you may be wondering why we did not contact the police. We did. We called the police when we heard about the theft of the cows, and after the 3 activists were attacked, we called them again. The police station is about 15 minutes away from the settlement and the Palestinian village. 2.5 hours later, a police officer showed up, went up to the settlement, had a coffee with them by his account, and came down again a while later, refusing to even allow us to file a police report. Activists who have been doing this work for years told me that in the past, there had been some police officers or army soldiers who would speak to the settlers when they were harassing or attacking the Palestinians. But this was not something that I observed in the 5 weeks that I was there. And I was told by the veteran activists that now there are only a handful of police or soldiers who are willing to respond supportively when Palestinians are being attacked, though we never know if someone will respond appropriately, and therefore we keep trying. Many of you are aware that the Israeli army is deployed around these settlements to protect their Jewish residents. But the army did not just protect the Jewish settlers. The army was an active participant in using violence and the threat of violence to expel the Palestinian villagers. One night, around 11 p.m., after everyone had gone into their tents or houses, we were awakened by the sound of automatic gunfire in the village. People came running out of their tents and houses, screaming the names of their older children who sleep on the water tanks or next to the animal pens. Villagers are afraid that settlers will come at night to destroy the water tanks or release the animals from their pens, and this is how they can be aware of it if and when it happens. Children were screaming and crying, and parents were frantic, shining flashlights into the darkness, searching for the gunmen, but finding no one. After 45 minutes or so, we all returned to our tents or houses, and tried to sleep. The next day, an army jeep pulled up in the village asking who owned the cars with the yellow license plates. In Palestine, Israel, Palestinians have to use white license plates, while Israelis are given yellow plates. The 4 Israelis and I went to speak with soldiers, and they told us that we were in a military firing zone, that they were using this area as war practice area, that they were using live ammunition and tanks, and that if we didn't get out, they would not be responsible for anything that happened to us. We told them that we knew that this was not a firing zone, that we have the maps of the firing zones provided by the Army. The senior officer responded, "I am the Army." We told them that there was a whole village there with children, elderly, shepherds, and their families. Quote, "That is not our problem. We're telling the 5 of you that you should leave, and that is all we need to do." Unquote. One of the critical roles provided by the activists is documentation of everything that is happening. We always had our phones charged and ready to take photos or video of whatever was going on, and live streamed it when we were afraid that something might happen to us or our cameras before we were able to share the footage. We had body cameras when we needed to be able to film, even if our phones were taken or not able to be used. This documentation is used by human rights groups and journalists who are telling the story of what is happening in these communities. Photos and videos have also been used to compel the police to file a case against settlers, and at times have been a critical piece of evidence when the army and police lie, accusing the activists or Palestinians of something that we did not do. According to the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, Israeli forces have either accompanied or actively supported settlers in nearly half of the recent attacks on Palestinians. This was a common occurrence in the time that I was with the shepherding communities. Some of the times when settlers would come to disperse the flocks by driving into them when they grazed, Israeli military jeeps would sit next to the flocks, sometimes eating their lunch, watching the settlers blowing their horns, shooting their guns, and just wait until the settlers had done their damage and left, and then they drive off. Rabbi Arik Asherman is the founder of Rabbis for Human Rights and one of the leaders of the Protective Presence activists working with the shepherding communities. On one morning, Rabbi Asherman drove with another activist and me to Wadi Sik in the central Jordan Valley to meet with the shepherds and hear about an incident that had just happened. We heard about settlers who were camped out on the nearby hill, having come earlier in the day and fired at one of the tents. Luckily, no one was injured by the gunshots, though the bullets tore through the tent. They also stole the shepherds' phones. Rabbi Asherman and the 2 of us drove to see if we could get photos of the settlers' trucks' license plates and speak with the Israeli soldiers who were stationed below the trucks and had likely been there when the shots were fired. I was instructed to take photos, and the other activist was doing live stream filming as we all got out of the car and walked over to the soldiers. The entire interaction from the time we got out of the car until we walked back to it was filmed and photographed. We drove back through another Palestinian village on our return to Wadi Sik, only to have the road blocked when we came around a bend by the Israeli soldiers with whom Rabbi Asherman had spoken earlier. And then, from down the hill, we could see 2 Israeli police cars coming towards us. The police got out, spoke to the soldiers, and then came over to our car where they began to do an inspection of the vehicle, finding a broken taillight and issuing us a ticket for $250, telling us that the car had to be fixed or off the road in 6 hours or it would be impounded. The police left, stopping at the soldiers' jeep again, and then turned around and came back to us, telling us that Rabbi Asherman was now being arrested for attacking, kicking the Israeli soldiers and impeding them from doing their work, and he was put in the police car and taken to jail. We had everything on camera, so the charge initially didn't hold up. But once again, we were seeing Israeli military and police collaborating and lying to undermine justice and human rights, something that I had heard about and now witnessed. And I say initially that it was effective, but I just received a message a month ago from Rabbi Asherman asking if I would be willing to come back to the West Bank for a trial because they have reinstituted charges against him, and they are saying that he did what they initially said he did, which was a lie. I usually went out for 4 days at a stretch, staying in the shepherding villages day and night. I would then return to Tel Aviv or Jerusalem to take a shower, clean my clothes, eat a full meal, and then head back out to the villages. One day, when I was back in Tel Aviv, I received a text from another activist who lived in Tel Aviv and knew that I had come back for the day, asking me if I wanted to join her on Kaplan that evening. Kaplan is a major street in Tel Aviv where the huge anti-government democracy demonstrations that were taking place weekly prior to October 7th. It had been transformed into a new anti-government protest demanding that Israel's leaders do more to free the hostages being held in Gaza. I was glad that she asked and wanted to go with me. It was an intense, somber, and powerful experience. Large posters of all of the Jewish hostages, along with their names, ages, and where they are from, lined both sides of the street and were hanging from light posts and plastering bus stands. Many protesters and families of the hostages keep a vigil there all day and evening. I sat in a tent with Shmuel Brodich, whose daughter and 3 grandchildren had all been abducted from their home. He gave me a pin to wear that has all of their photos on it. We just sat there and listened and told him that we would work for a ceasefire, a just peace, and their release. It was heartbreaking. I looked at all of the photos, children, elderly, people of every age, and of course, I thought that this could be my family. The fear and dread were everywhere. As we walked away, the sense of despondency that I had kept at bay for weeks started seeping into my soul. Talking about the fear and dread being faced by the Palestinians as well was not an option in these tents. And that awareness of the incredible difficulty of holding both groups' pain and suffering, not engaging in a false equivalence that Palestinians as a people and Israelis as a people were facing the same level of threat or danger, but recognizing that there was an overwhelming set of grief and loss and fear for both peoples, led me to retreat into myself for a day, trying to figure out how to put one foot in front of the other. Most of the activists with whom I was working had connections to someone who was killed or kidnapped, whether or not they were family of them. They would rotate on and off shifts to attend funerals or just for some time to be quiet. It was helpful to talk with them, but it's not as if they had it down, this balancing of compassion, commitment, understanding. It never got easy. It's not easy now. Since October 7th, 456 Palestinians have been killed on the West Bank, including 115 children, and more than 4,750 have been injured. In 2023, approximately 4,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homes in the West Bank, with more than 800 forced out of their homes between October 7th and the beginning of November. I don't know how many have been exiled in the past 5 months. We are hearing reports that Israeli forces are raiding locations and attacking communities across the occupied West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem. Of the 4 villages where I worked, 2, Wadi Sik and Ain Rashash, no longer exist. In Ain Rashash, the army put boulders in the road that lead into the villages, preventing water from being able to be brought in. Once that happened, it was a matter of days until the villagers could no longer survive with their herds. They had to leave. After dismantling most of their structures, they left one afternoon. We, the activists, escaped at night, hidden from the settlers by the darkness. Wadi Sik had a far more violent end. Settlers and army soldiers came into the village one afternoon after having threatened the villagers in the previous days and having told them to leave. They blindfolded, beat, tortured, and attempted to sexually assault the Palestinians. blindfolded, zip-tied, and roughed up the activists, and held all of them for hours in buildings or animal pens in the village. When they were finally released, the Palestinians were so severely hurt they had to be hospitalized. Al-Marjat, located in the central Jordan Valley between Ramallah and Jericho, asked the activists to stop coming. The level of violence from the settlers was escalating rapidly, and the settlers were particularly incensed at the presence of the activists, whom they considered to be traitors. The Palestinians felt that our presence might be exacerbating the violence, and so we left, though we are still in contact with them, and they are still there. A couple of weeks ago, I received a video from one of the Al-Marajat villagers showing the settlers who had come at night, running through their tents, screaming at them and attacking them with wood batons and automatic weapons. And in Al-Farsiya, the violence is escalating. In December, I received a message from one of the activists, which I'll read to you. Today, December 4th at 2 o'clock in the morning in Farsiya, during a protective presence shift, settlers arrived, and she gives their names, accompanied by a tractor, threw stones at the family's houses and entered the family's houses, threatened and attacked them. In the meantime, the tractor, which was driven by, she gives the settler's name, started turning over the rocks in an attempt to plow about 20 meters away from the community houses. She gives the name of an activist, approached the tractor to understand what was happening. He was attacked with pepper spray sprayed directly into his eyes by, gives the settler's name, and collapsed. Another activist heard his cries and came to cover him with his body, but he himself was beaten and stones were thrown at him. He needed medical treatment in a hospital. Another activist provided backup to the community and communication with relevant parties. The settlers ran away when the army and police came. And as for the Brodich family, with whose grandfather we sat under the tent on Kaplan Street in Tel Aviv, all members of the family were freed by Hamas on November 26th. So where do we go from here? On that day when I was feeling so low, I reread Michael Svard's article from which I quoted earlier and found these two sentences that I have now copied and taped to my Palestine-Israel bookshelf at home. Quote, "When we crawl out of the deep pit we are in, we will find ourselves again facing the truth written on the wall in bold letters, the same truth that has always been written on the wall and that everyone, it seems, is trying to ignore. There is no solution to the conflict in Israel-Palestine that is not based on respecting everyone's human rights, on ending the occupation, ending apartheid, ending the blockade, realizing the right to self-determination of the Palestinian people, and upholding the provisions of international law by all," unquote. There is no military solution. There is only a political solution based on justice and compassion for all human beings equally. A political solution that addresses the root causes of what is happening both in Gaza and in the West Bank, the 75 years of Israeli military occupation and apartheid, and the U.S.'s support of this untenable and systemic oppression. Full stop. There will have to be truth and reconciliation, but before that, there has to be an end to this violence, a total and complete ceasefire. What can we do when this seems so overwhelming? There is a lot that is complicated about this situation, but this part is not. I'm going to suggest 4 things that you can do starting today. Some things take more time than others. You figure out what you have the bandwidth to do, but do something. Do as much as you can. And after the presentation is over, I have clipboards over here, and if you sign your name and an email address, I will send you this. So you don't have to write it down if you don't want to right now. 1, so for the first and most pressing action, contact your elected officials to call for an immediate ceasefire and humanitarian aid. You can do this repeatedly to your representatives and encourage your family and friends to do the same. There are a number of organizations that make this very easy to do. If you go onto the website for Jewish Voice for Peace, www.jewishvoiceforpeace.org, and you select Take Action, it has a 2-click process to get you to the page where you can fill in your information, and an email will be sent to your representatives. You can also pick up the phone and give them a quick call. We've spoken with representatives at the local, state, and national levels. They are hearing your voices. Even when they don't respond, they know how many people are calling or writing and what they are saying. Be in touch with them again and again. 2, send humanitarian aid. You all know that UNRWA has been blocked from providing all of humanitarian aid as the primary humanitarian aid organization in Gaza, based on what looks like trumped-up charges against 12 UNRWA workers. It's being investigated now, but it looks like it was trumped up by Israel in its entirety. We received word from the Jordan Valley activists that more shepherding villages are drying up. I have no more money to buy water. CJ PIP, the Committee for Just Peace in Palestine, Israel, will send whatever money is donated today through the New Israel Fund to the Jordan Valley activists to get water to the villages and support their human rights work. I've put a basket on the table over there, and I'll pass it around afterwards. If you can make a donation of any size, we will pass on every penny of it. 3, there are many actions taking place around the Chicago metro area. You can find out about them through signing up with the Chicago Coalition for Justice in Palestine on Facebook. Or you can follow CJ PIP on Facebook. Go to as many as you can. Our showing of support is critical, and it is being seen and heard. And I just want to defer a moment to say that when I was in Al-Farsiya, the shepherding village in the northern Jordan Valley, we were sitting at the table outside under the tree in the early morning before everyone went off to work with the sheep. And they have phones, and they were watching YouTube, and all of a sudden, I'm hearing the voice of somebody that I recognize yelling, and it ended up being a group of activists in Congress who were yelling during some testimony about what was going on in Israel-Palestine. And the Palestinians are watching this happen, and they're telling me, America, America, this is America. They're talking about us. And I'm like, yes, they are. And I was just overwhelmed because there were people that I knew doing that. And so as soon as we were done, I texted them and said, your voice was heard in the northern Jordan Valley. If you ever feel like so those of us who work in activism, I'm sure those of you who work on issues that are difficult, like you're not getting where, you're just hitting a wall, it's of no use, don't believe it. You never know where the ripple is going. We need to keep our voices being heard. And finally, deepen your education and be informed. There are so many great sources of information available. Democracy Now!, Al Jazeera, the Israel-based 972 magazine, Electronic Intifada, and Mondaways are just a few. But read and question everything. Use multiple sources to try and verify what you are reading or hearing. I'd like to spend just these last few minutes of my presentation talking about anti-Semitism and how this very real threat is being weaponized to undermine truth and justice. So often when people know that I am Jewish and that I'm speaking out against the brutality of the Israeli regime, they tell me that they're afraid of questioning or criticizing Israel, that when they have done so, they've been accused of being anti-Semitic. This is a dangerous notion, that criticizing the actions of a nation state is somehow off limits for anyone, Jew or non-Jew, and that when we do so, we are accused of being anti-Semitic, or in my case, a self-hating Jew. So let's unpack a couple of terms and understand how this is happening. What is anti-Semitism? Anti-Semitism is hatred of and discrimination against Jews, or dehumanizing stereotypes of Jewish people. There has been a significant and frightening increase in anti-Semitism in this past decade. The source of this anti-Semitism is primarily white nationalism. They have killed Jews in synagogues, raised Nazi symbols at the January 6th insurrection in DC, and other anti-Semitic rallies. Just last month, there were anti-Semitic flyers put on cars on the north side of Chicago with a link to Goyim TV, a channel run by the Goyim Defense League, which promotes anti-Semitism and white supremacy. White supremacy weaves anti-Semitism together with anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-Black, anti-queer, and anti-Arab beliefs and attacks. Our work to stop anti-Semitism must be part of a larger effort to stop this harassment, violence, and oppression of any and all of these groups. So what is anti-Zionism? Anti-Zionism is the belief that political Zionism, a political ideology that says Jews have greater rights and entitlements in Palestine, Israel than Palestinians, Christians, Muslims, greater rights than anyone else, is wrong. Anti-Zionism says that it is wrong, it is apartheid, to systematically give one group of people in Israel greater rights than another, just because of their religious or ethnic identity. Criticizing the Israeli government for its policies or actions is no different than criticizing any other nation state. And given that our tax dollars are being used to support Israel's actions, including its violent oppression of the Palestinians and the stealing and decimation of their land, it is not only acceptable, but I would argue the moral obligation for all of us to speak out against this and in support of justice. I thank you for letting me share my journey with you. I hope that it has given you a greater understanding of some of what is happening in Palestine, Israel, and a commitment to taking a first step or deepening your involvement in this work for a just peace for every human being in this land. Thank you. So I would love to, if you have any questions or comments, give you a chance to. I'm not going to guarantee you that I can answer everything or I have all the data or I know everything, but I'll tell you what I know and what I don't know if you have any thoughts. And all questions are okay. If I feel uncomfortable with it, I'll say so.
Before we do that.
Oh, you're not on, actually, I don't think.
Before we do that, I just want to give deep bows to you and thank you.
Thank you.
You will always be in my heart.
Thank you.
Okay, questions? Why don't we take a breath? Because that was a lot. I was thinking about how much you must need to just breathe and be. Mm-hmm. And maybe this is news for some folks. Maybe you had some ideas. Maybe you knew. And there is something in hearing it, the firsthand experience, that is sobering and numbing and challenging, and it should be. So why don't we take a breath? If it's available to you, I do invite you to be aware of how your body feels. If it's not available, just look around the room and just allow yourself to arrive back into the space and into your body. Okay? And we have a question. Don't leave your bodies too soon.
I'm not that articulate, but I hope everyone understands what I'm trying to say. When I heard you use the word inhuman, as the Israelis describe the Palestinians, what does that remind us all of? It's a prejudice. it's finding someone who you feel is below you. And it strikes me that Jews have been vilified for centuries, obviously. And in a way, this is put very poorly, but they need someone to below them. Kind of like what they say about, I'm reading Rural White Rage right now. Kind of the way poor white people need to have someone below them, and it would be people of color. So that struck me very, very hard in this conversation, and thank you so much. It was wonderful that you shared all that with us. And you're very brave.
Thank you. I don't think that that was inarticulate at all. I think it's exactly right. And I often think about the cycle of violence, right? For those of us who do that work, we all know that it continues unless it gets healed. And it certainly wasn't healed after the Second World War. And it certainly has infused the entire society. And it infuses us here in the United States as Jews. We learn that the next Holocaust is around the corner. We always have to have our antenna up. We're always looking for it. And it then has a profound effect on the way that we see the other. Instead of, as you were talking about in your sermon this morning, that we are all one, we learn we are not all one, and we have to be on the defensive. And it becomes a form of aggression that slips from being defensive to being aggressive to being racist. And it's a horrible thing.
I had an observation and a question. When this first started to happen, I have both Muslim friends and Jewish friends in DuPage County. They both said they have to have armed security at their worship services. And I thought, that is so awful that they both are having this kind of problem. And my question is, are you working with Muslim groups too in the area? And how are they feeling about this? I know they've been very aggressive at some of our political meetings for sure, and sharing their views, which I can understand, but how are you working together with them?
Yeah, so we work in coalition. This work is not done by individuals or individual organizations. We work in coalition on a local level, on a state level, on a national level, and internationally. And so we work with groups of Muslims, we work with groups of Palestinians who are both Christian as well as Muslim as well as secular. We work very closely in our work, and part of the work as a white Jew is to make sure when I am doing my leading that I'm not usurping the appropriate roles of people who need to be in leadership positions who are Palestinian or who are more closely connected to what's going there. And so we take turns being in leadership positions, we take turns in different forums, but we work very closely together, both on a political level as well as social level. And how Palestinians are feeling, how Muslims are feeling, everyone is feeling besieged and frightened and fighting despondency. Because what we see our government doing, despite the periodic comments about how we won't stand for this and et cetera, what we see is our government sending billions of dollars in U.S. military to Israel, including just this past month, Biden sent billions of dollars to Israel in U.S. military aid. So there's a sense of overwhelmedness and real question about how do we keep the struggle going effectively and not give in to there is no hope, right? And that's just not a prerogative for us. We have to keep fighting, we have to keep the struggle up, and we have to take guidance from the people of Palestine, right? And not get in our heads that we know what's best for them.
There are other coalitions that are happening as well around the country. Christian anti-Zionists are also speaking up. Unitarian Universalists are joining Mennonites in DC next week and have a presence there. So everything is connected. There, and then I'll come back.
Could you comment on the continued existence of Israel as a Jewish state? Is that even possible? Is it desirable and necessary in your estimation?
So, Israel has been defined as the state of the Jewish people, the national home of the Jewish people, a Jewish state. When people ask me about that, I have to say, what do you mean by a Jewish state? Does that mean a place where Jews get priority over non-Jews? Does it mean a state where the values that we were raised with of what does it mean to be a Jew predominate? What does it mean? Israel passed not too long ago something called the nation-state law, which says Jews are the only people who are entitled to national aspirations within this land. I don't buy that. Do I think that Israel can continue to behave as a rogue state, supporting in its perspective the well-being of Jews at the expense of Palestinians? I think you're seeing what's happening now. I don't think we're going to move the clock back and go back to October 6th, when we had apartheid, we had oppression, we had occupation, but we didn't have the rest of the world going, oh, this is wrong. October simply highlighted it for people. This is what's happening. But the commitment on the part of the Israeli government, not just Netanyahu, not just his cabinet ministers, but on part of the government as a whole, to maintaining this system in which Jews are given priorities and better rights and greater access to resources than non-Jews is accepted. There is a very small left in Israel that are fighting against it. It is there, but it is extremely small. I visited with one of the other members of the Knesset who no longer is who's no longer a Knesset, a retired one, with whom I had worked earlier. And I asked him, like, what are you doing? I had come back from visiting the shepherds, and I was taking a day off in Tel Aviv, where he lives. And we got together, and I said, what are you doing? And he said, you know what? I'm not doing anything. I'm done. And I'm like, whoa, 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 what do you mean you're done? And he said, my entire life has been a failure. Everything that I worked for has completely unraveled, and my focus is on my grandchildren and and trying to eke out an existence here. If we could all leave, we'd leave, but we can't, so we're here. That to me was a profound conversation. And what I see from activists there is that there is a left. There are Jews and Arabs and Christians within Palestine and Israel who are speaking up, who are fighting, who are struggling for human rights. But it is a very small number of people. And I don't anticipate this small number growing from anything that I'm seeing. So it doesn't look good to me. I don't see any solution except an imposed solution. And with the U.S. a part of it at this point, this U.S. is not what we'd call an honest broker. I mean, the U.S. has investment in our being able to sell and put all of this money, military money, into Israel. It works for us. Reverend Beth mentioned Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism is much larger than Jewish Zionism in the United States, right? They're much, much larger. It's about 8 to 10 times the size of Jewish Zionism. Christian Zionism is completely within our national government and much of our state government. It is a very powerful movement which says what's happening right now is working well. It's working well because you're supposed to, if I understand this whole theory, theocratic theory, you have to have Jews in control of the land before Christ can come back, and there's supposed to be this huge conflation and a conflagration, and then once that happens, you know, you get to have your second coming. I mean, not you personally, but you know, I mean, that's the idea behind it. So when Christian Zionists look at what's happening, we're on the right course right now. So I don't see our country moving in the right direction unless there is a coming together of people from all different backgrounds who normally are not involved in this because they want to focus on some other issue that is less filled with, holes that they can fall into while dealing with their neighbors or their friends or their whatever, or our politicians who don't want to touch it, and say no more. Because Israelis have said, without the United States' money, this wouldn't happen. They only can do this because of our money via weaponry that we are sending over there. So the solution is in our hands, and the question is, do we have the willpower? And right now, I don't see it. I see it coming more. We see more in the streets. Nancy Pelosi just signed a letter calling for a ceasefire. I mean, that's huge, right? So there are changes afloat, but not until we have a number of people saying no more.
I have another question here and there and here, so.
I was going to ask you why President Biden isn't doing the morally correct thing. And you said it's partly because of the investments of the United States in weaponry and how important it is to our economy or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it may cost him the election. Mm-hmm. So is he a morally weak person?
I don't know him personally. I'm a data gal, and I don't have data that I can say he's morally weak or morally strong. I would say that he's very aware of whose votes count and whose votes don't, and who's voting. And that's why there have been movements all over the United States, including here in Illinois, of people voting undecided or uncommitted and to say to him, you either come down right on this or we're not going to support you. And that's a scary notion to me as well, right? I mean, because the alternative is Trump, and I probably shouldn't be talking about this in a church, so I'm not going to talk about elections, but it is a very frightening thing, but I think that what counts for most politicians is being reelected. It's their life. That's what they want. And as he's done the math, he thinks that by supporting Israel, he's in better shape. And he may be right. He may be in better shape by getting reelected, by supporting the Israeli military. I think it is a morally corrupt response, but why he does it and why he doesn't see it, how you can see what everyone is seeing, I don't know. I just don't know. But I can't weigh in on why, except that the thing that seems obvious, which is he thinks it'll get him elected.
Yeah, I think you probably have already answered my question, but I just wondered if you were holding out any hope for a change of government in Israel. But when there's so few people on the left there, it sounds like there isn't much hope.
Well, I mean, there's this Welsh philosopher who I love named Raymond Williams, and he said something once which is also up on my wall. And he said, to be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair inevitable. So rational response, looking at what's going on, I would despair because I don't see this change coming, and I just see it going further down and getting further ramped up going down. But I hope I'm a radical for justice, I'm a radical for love, I'm a radical for peace, and that means my job is to make hope possible. So I don't know what will work. Somebody once told me years ago, I had been pushed out of the congregations where I worked for speaking out about Palestinians, and I was devastated. And I called a friend of mine to talk about it, and he said to me, he was very wise, he said, look, if you want to be involved on an issue for which there's a bandwagon, for which you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, there are a whole lot of issues that need work. So get onto one of them. If you're going to be working on Palestine, Israel, this is back in the 1980s, if you're going to be working on Palestine, Israel, then you better be happy with knowing that you have the privilege of being a teeny tiny link at some end of one chain, and you're not probably going to see the other end of the chain, period. But that's not your job. Your job is to be this one link. And if that's not good enough, then do something else, but don't waste your energy bitching about it. Like, do something that's going to make a difference. If you have it in your gut to do this, then do this one, because we need it. But the light on this one, I don't think you're ever going to see it. So make your own decision. And that was the decision I made. Like, I'm going to work on this, and it'll be what will be, but it's on me, in particular as a Jew, to be doing this work. And I would argue it's on anyone who has the wherewithal to do the work.
Thank you.
Charlie?
I think it's already been touched on, but I saw either Amanpour or Democracy Now! Had a piece isolating the financial part that really is a benefit to the various countries supporting either side. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of money.
It is. You're absolutely right. This is playing with the big people. This is big money, and lots of people are making a lot of money off of this carnage.
Yep.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much. This was incredible. My name is Amy. This is Moody, my partner. He's Palestinian, and I met him 12 years ago. And I don't know, we got into, I said, what's your name? He said, Moody. And I said, oh, what background is that? And he said, I'm Palestinian. And I said, I don't know what that is. Mm-hmm. I don't know I've never heard of Palestine. We went to a friend's house once, and she made him a birthday dinner, and it was Pakistani because she didn't realize they were different places. These are very common stories, and I was very well educated. I went to LT, I was in all the honors classes, I did AP, I mean, the whole deal. I had no idea any of it. We haven't received, my generation has not received this education, and of course that's intentional, I believe. So first of all, just thank you so much for all your work. Jewish Voice for Peace and the work that your organization does has been amazing, because your voices mean more than Palestinian voices, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. That's just the reality, is to have Jewish voices saying the things that you're saying are more impactful than even other white voices, because it's from within. So first of all, thank you. Second of all, I have two questions. So one of them is, some of the links that everything has gotten to recently, when you look at the starvation of children, for example, we've got, there's food 10 miles away, and children in Palestine are starving in the north of Gaza. When you talk to your friends who live in Israel or who are in the American Jewish community, what is their take on that? Because I don't think that there's much self-defense argument there. So is it that they don't believe it's happening? Is it that they don't think about it, or do they believe that it's okay to do that in order to achieve their means? So that's one of my questions. And then my other question is, I know that recently, as some of the tide has been changing, and people are more concerned about what's happening, there's this sense that everyone's just going to blame Netanyahu and say, oh, this was just a bad apple, but Israel itself has no issue, and we're gonna get him out, and then everything's gonna kind of get swept under the rug. So curious what your perspective is on that.
Okay. I'll probably not remember what all the questions were, but just tell me once I've started. So first of all, go backwards. So in terms of Netanyahu, there is a sense, certainly within the American Jewish community, a desire to say, oh, see, he's the problem, and it's the settlers, it's them, right? But the reality, as I shared with you in my presentation, is we know it goes all the way back to the beginning of the state. It's just that it's more out. People are saying it more now than they said it before, but it's more explicit, that's all. So yes, there is a desire to put it on them and put it on the settlers, and there also is a sense on the part of a lot of, we call them PEPs, Progressive Except Palestine. There's a desire on the part of people who see themselves as progressive to be like, wait a minute, maybe I'm on the wrong side of this one. Like, I didn't think I was. And good people, right? Good intentions, as you said, well educated, but people just haven't gotten it for very intentional reasons. Our media is set up, everything is set up to teach a particular perspective. So now when it's like, oh, wait a minute, maybe this is really bad, it's like Netanyahu. Like, we got to get rid of him. But there is not this interest or willingness to unpack the past 75 years. As Michael Svard was saying, it's like that we're nowhere near that. But for us in the United States, we could never even say there's anything wrong with Israel. So for people to be able to even say it's this slice of Israel that's bad, that's progress. But the reality is that slice simply is the top of a much larger base. And those of us who've been working in this for a while understand that. But within different communities, they don't get it. They just see, oh, it's these crazy right-wingers that have taken over. We need labor back. Labor was when it was good. Well, those were my people. And labor set this groundwork that was based on racism and expulsion. But that's not understood. That's not the history, just like you said, you weren't taught it, we weren't taught it as Jews, and people haven't been taught this. So educating people as to this information is huge. But look at our own education in this country around African Americans and around Native Americans. How many hundreds of years has it taken for us to be able to have open sharing of information? And look what's happening. The 1619 Project, that book, and the efforts that have come from it, those are being lambasted by the right as being fake information, right? So people don't want to learn about our own sordid history. Nobody wants to. That's not, everyone wants to be clean. And we're finding out we're not. So I think with that it's going to take a long time for people to recognize it's not just Netanyahu, it's the entire project that said this land is for Jews, and there isn't any other problem there's no problem with them taking that land. All right. You asked me something else, though, and I know I've forgotten it. I'm sorry.
I was going to remember.
No, thank you so much. The other question I had was around specifically the starvation of the children in the north of Gaza.
Oh, yeah, so what do people think about that? So again, our neighbors, my colleagues, people that I work with who do not support what I'm doing are not horrible folk. They want people to live. They don't want people to starve, etc. But they have no understanding of the politics of what's going on with the starvation. There is enough. I just heard this in a report, and I checked the data, so I'm feeling comfortable saying it. There's enough flour in trucks going from the entryway into Gaza, all the way back to Ashkelon, that would feed Gazans for 5 months. Right now, in line, waiting to go in, 5 months of flour, right? But people buy the lines. They're hearing from Israel, they're hearing from our American government, they're hearing from the press. The press just mimics what they hear from the American government, which is, we can't go in there. All that's going to happen is Hamas will take this food and they will use it to support themselves, and the barbaric treatment of Israel by Hamas will continue. It's like this twisted notion. No matter what you talk about, it gets twisted around, and it's back to our survival. And our survival depends on not giving Gazans food. Our survival depends on, there were 3 pipelines bringing water into Gaza. Now there are 2, and one of them now has been blocked. And the last one only has 40% viability. So people are dying of thirst. There is no water for people, right? You tell them that, and they're like, yeah, but if you open up the pipelines, then it's going to give a win to Hamas. It's like it always switches back to that. It's like a deep rut in the way that people have been taught to believe. No blame on them, but that's how they think. And so we have to help people go, no, think about this. But it's very hard for people to let go of the tropes that they have learned since 1967, when Hamas became as strong as it was. And the understanding of why did Hamas become so strong, understanding that the United States propped up Hamas to fight against Yasser Arafat. People don't know this. They don't know, they don't understand it. And why should they? Where would they learn about it? The only reason I know is because I'm digging, but others don't. So for me, there's this sense of there has to be compassion for folks who don't get it, but at the same time, we're now up to 32,000 plus people dead in Gaza. How long do we have to work on understanding and compassion before we get some change? So that's why you're seeing, at your meetings in DuPage County, other people are starting to just explode because they're getting killed one night. And how long do we talk about peace and love and the need for compassion before it's like, stop those guns, stop the military, force Israel to make changes? People are getting like, We can't do this anymore. That's why I have fear about the election. I think people are going, you know what? Done. We are done. My colleagues, my activists, my people are like, you know what? I'm done. That's it. You know, that's scary. But it's where people are at.
Is there, yes?
I had the same question about Netanyahu, so thanks for asking that. But I think just seeing the World Central Kitchen van, they exploded. That showed you that they really just want to cut off humanitarian aid.
Right, that's actually a very interesting situation. So that organization, that NGO that she just mentioned, has been involved in providing food aid in Gaza for many, many years. It got attention because there were white people that were killed. That's right. Right? And that's not good. Again, I'm not saying that was a good thing, right? But there were white people that were killed. It's why having my body on the line is really important, because if a white person, a Jew, gets hurt, it causes a lot more attention than if a Palestinian brown body gets killed, right, or hurt. So with the food situation, I just learned about this myself because I didn't really know who they were, and I contacted some people and were like, who are these folks? The organization that provides all of the support throughout the entirety of Gaza is UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Work Agency. That has been the agency that has been there since the UN decided we've got a big problem here with all of these refugees being forced into this small piece of land. We better set up an infrastructure. And that's when UNRWA was set up years and years ago, okay? And they are the ones who have the ability and have the infrastructure for getting food out to people, for doing education, for doing medical care, right? It is the social service backbone of Gaza. And it was undermined. Netanyahu put out a statement. Again, like he helps us because he says things oftentimes where we can say, can you see what he said? He made a statement about UNRWA beforehand, before attacking and saying, oh, these 12 or 8 UNRWA people were involved in the attack on October 7th, saying we need to get rid of UNRWA because UNRWA is undermining what we are trying to do, which is eliminate all of Gaza, right? So the fact that this NGO, which works very closely with Israel and the United States, so that's you have to know as well, was attacked, that really pissed them off because they had like this, like, you don't hurt us. Like, everyone knows who gets hurt and who doesn't, and you don't hurt that NGO. And that their 3 cars were targeted and bombed. Woo! That caused a real kerfuffle, right? But the desire to keep food out of Gaza, like that, it's almost irrelevant. That just shows you, like, they're even getting sloppy in messing up the screen that they have to show, like, oh yeah, we are concerned and we're trying to support them and the U.S. is trying to support. So it was a horrible thing that happened, and my heart goes out to the families of those people who were killed, but that really has almost nothing to do with the problem of not having food in Gaza. And the guy who heads that organization has a long history of speaking out against Palestinians, but working with the U.S. government and the Israeli government.
I have a question.
Sure. And if anybody has to leave, please feel free. I'm not insulted. We've been here a long time.
We're really glad everyone is here.
Yeah, you're welcome to stay.
Yeah. One of the questions that I have has to do with the reaction to what's happening being called a genocide. And I wonder if you have any reflections on that.
Yeah, so I had to look it up and okay, what is genocide? What is not genocide? And one of the leading experts in Israel on genocide came out with a statement recently saying, this whole debate about what is genocide and what is not is ridiculous. This is a textbook case of genocide. So whether or not it is or not, I don't particularly care from my own vantage point if it is It equals the definition. When you are slaughtering an entire people, when you are starving an entire people, when you are going in and destroying their entire land, their infrastructure, when you're doing it not only in Gaza, where supposedly we've got a problem because of Hamas, but you're doing it on the West Bank, which has no Hamas there, and you're destroying the people there and starving them and pushing them out of their lands and stealing them and allowing is the wrong word, using your military in conjunction with your renegade settlers to do this work, that's a problem. You want to call it something other than genocide? You call it something other than genocide. To me, it is destruction of an entire people with the intent to eradicate them from their lands, period. Is that genocide or not? I don't know. But it is what I've just said it is.
Thank you. I wonder if you would want to tell us about your ram's horn.
Oh, sure. So that's a ram's horn right there in the front. And when I was in Al-Farsiya, I was standing with one of the shepherds and when he was in the pens before we went out in the morning, and I saw that on the ground. And I asked him, why is this on the ground? For me, it's like something precious, right? Like, why didn't he pick it up? And he said, oh, it's one of the ram's horns. And I said, can I have it? And he was like, you want it? And I'm like, yeah. I said, in my tradition, we take the ram's horn and we hollow it out, and then we make something called a shofar, which is an instrument for calling people to worship. I don't want to make it into something Jewish. I don't want to transform it. I want to keep it as a symbol for me in my home that I see, that it's a tactile thing, and you're welcome to touch it. It's really an amazing thing to touch. And just remember this moment. And he said, well, you take it with you wherever you go, and you just remember us, okay? No matter what happens to us, you remember us. So I take it with me wherever I go. That's why I have it.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you all. Oh, you have another
Yeah.
question?
I can see why Israel would want to obliterate the Hamas, but I'm just wondering, what's the solution for that? You don't want terrorists, using people as human shields.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
What's the solution, do you think, regarding the Hamas?
Hamas?
You don't want
Yeah.
terrorists in the area.
Right, so the solution for Hamas is liberation of the Palestinians. Hamas is a group that has a violent wing to it. It also has whole government infrastructures and all the rest of that. But Hamas has a violent wing to it. And the only way that you deal with this violence is provide a reason for people to feel that there is an alternative to self-destruction and destroying others. That really is the only thing. I mean, it may sound Pollyannish, but I don't think it is. The only way you are going to stop people from wanting to destroy you is you stop being something that is destroying them. And at this point, I don't know how anyone who grew up under occupation, which is what has happened for generations, could want peace. And there are Palestinians, we work with them, who really believe in a just peace that would be for both people. But I can very easily imagine being a person living under these situations and seeing your rights, your families killed, seeing everything destroyed, feeling like, you know what, I got nothing left. I have nothing left to lose. And exploding out. I truly understand it. So for me, when people say to me, but what about Hamas? I say, yeah, the pain, the hurt that was caused by what happened October 7th is real. I lost a member of one of my cousins. I don't in any way dismiss how horrible it was for the Jews who experienced that attack. But that attack only happened because of 75 years of horror being done to these people. So that's what I say. We have to get to the roots of the problem, and you're not going to get it by trying to get rid of Hamas. Do you know how many people have been encouraged by the deaths of 32,000 people and all that's happened to become violent? No. To feel that this is the only response? God help us. And the number of kids who've been traumatized, the number of adults, you think about it for yourself. I think about the little bitty trauma I experienced in my little 5 weeks over there. And then I think about the people who are there day in and day out, who've been there with this, who've lost people. It's like this is going to take so much resources, so much love and compassion, so much support and embracing by the world. And until that happens, we're not going to take care of this.
I want to just share something with everybody about an experience that I've had with Moody and his family, and I don't want to speak for you, so if you have anything else to add, please do. But I think one of the things that has been really shocking to me in speaking to his family is I think the rest of us in many ways we're shocked, we're horrified, we're despairing, and his family's like, this is our life. I mean, this is just what we've experienced. So there's this interesting perspective around hope that is surprising to me, where at least certain members of his family feel like people know what Palestine is now. People have some idea that this is happening to us. This has been happening to us for 75 years and nobody cares. And now there are entire generations of people where the first time they've heard of Palestine is based on what's been happening. And so I find that very hopeful. You know, I think that this can just, as you said before, be just this depressing conversation that, you know, makes you just want to check out of it. But I think the fact that there's now awareness of something that's been really sort of under the rug for a really long time, and the fact that there are, I think, Palestinians who feel that way has been both surprising and hopeful for me in terms of continuing on.
Thanks so much.
Could you compare this situation to South Africa's history and how they have come out of it to some extent, at least?
No, I really can't, just because, I mean, all I know is what the most lightly informed person knows about what life in South Africa is like right now, right? I mean, we all know that they had an apartheid regime, and we know that Israel has an apartheid regime. It's different, but there's apartheid in both of them. And we know that they ended up having elections and taking over power. The black South Africans took over power. But in terms of the dynamics there, in terms of the U.S. involvement in it and the funding of it, and who has a stake in the situation as it is right now, as compared to what they had in South Africa, I don't know. I mean, all I can do just to know the piece that I know about Israel. But all I know is that there are parallels, but I'm sure there are significant differences as well. But that's why also people were like, this isn't apartheid, South Africa's apartheid. So that was why we had to go back to, wait a minute, what is apartheid? What is existing in Israel? And let's get our data and define it by what's going on in Israel, not by comparing it to what happened in South Africa.
That's right. That's right. And organizations can take the apartheid pledge, which you can find on the American Friends Service Committee website, but it is for organizations, so. It's not your fault. And it's, things shatter.
That's right.
Things break. And we seek to repair, to make them better. And we pick up pieces, and we go on, and we keep on doing what it is that we're called to do. Thank you. Thank you so much.